time you go out and have a hearty breakfast, I want you to take a little bit of a closer look. Is it a good meal? To answer that question, you might look at how the eggs are cooked or at the doneness of the bacon. But chances are you're probably not going to think about the chicken that laid the egg or the pig that provided the bacon. But if you go back 100 years ago, it wasn't always this way. Chances were you knew the chicken that laid the egg, or at least you knew the person that knew the chicken that laid the egg. 60% of the U.S. population lived in rural areas, and 40% of the American public worked on a farm. The connection between the animals that provided our food and our dinner plates was more clear and obvious. Today, if you ask a food consumer what they think of animal agriculture, chances are they're still going to think about, straw hats and red barns of yesteryear. But animal agriculture has dramatically changed. Today, only about 1% of the U.S. population works on a farm. As a result, when people's romantic ideals of the past come in conflict with the reality of today's animal agriculture, it can be startling for many consumers. So how did this change happen? Well, one answer is that the past isn't as romantic as is often presumed. Raising farm animals can be hard, backbreaking, dirty business. This is a picture of my father and their farm animals they had back in the 1940s. My mom grew up in the city in Amarillo, Texas in the 40s. They had backyard poultry way before backyard chickens were cool. And I got a little taste of this in my own youth when I raised a few sheep and pigs for 4-H and FFA competitions. Even though we only had a few pampered, well-cared-for farm animals, even still, in a given year, some of these animals would die due to sickness, illness, or sometimes even from another animal attack. Now, I'll give you a little bit of this background just to give you a bit of a sense about why animal agriculture has changed over time. Scientists developed better feeds that meant animals didn't have to root around in the dirt in order to get essential minerals. It means we could bring animals indoors and protect them from the elements. So you like heating and air conditioning, and animals do too. Animals indoors means they're protected from predators. A chicken doesn't have to be worried about getting taken down by a hawk or a pig by a coyote. But bringing lots of animals indoors poses other challenges. Animals will often fight and peck on each other. A pecking order, yes, in fact, is a real thing. And so as a consequence, this led to more individualized housing systems, or the so-called gestation crates and battery cages that are today the subject of much conversation. A gestation crate is an individualized pen for a pregnant sow. The pen allows the sow to eat without being harassed by the other sows, and it also allows for individualized medical care. But it's also a fairly sterile environment that doesn't allow much room for movement. So what we have is a really complicated set of trade-offs in thinking about how best to raise farm animals. But make no mistake about it, a lot of the changes that we've seen over time have produced many benefits. Perhaps the most obvious benefit is the prices that you and I, as consumers, pay for food. According to one calculation, a school teacher working in the 1900s had to work 60 minutes or an hour in order to earn enough money to buy a dozen eggs. Today, a school teacher only has to work 3 minutes to buy that same dozen eggs. In the past, 50, 100 years ago, chicken was a rare treat reserved for Sunday dinners or holidays. Today, any of us can easily pick up chicken nuggets on our way home. And because these animals and the conditions that we raise them in are so much more efficient, it means we need fewer animals than we had in the past. If you go back 20 or 30 years ago, today we have fewer farm animals. What that means is that we have less waste being emitted, less land being used, and we have fewer greenhouse gases that are being emitted. Despite these positive changes, though, many consumers still have some kind of suspicion that something still needs to be done. And the answers are often posed as something very simple. Just free the chickens from their cages. Let the hogs run free. There is some controversy about whether cage-free is even better for the chickens or not. Now, I'm not going to go into that here, but I think it's safe to say that many consumers say that they would prefer farm animals raised this way. And in fact, you can head down to virtually any grocery store and buy cage-free eggs, or you can go down to Whole Foods and buy free-range pork. But most consumers don't do it. Why? The most obvious reason is price. Our research suggests that cage-free and organic eggs, for example, are about twice as expensive as their conventional counterparts. As a result, the market share for these products is often far less than 10%. So if private actions, the ability to go in a store and buy something that has at least a perceived higher level of animal welfare, doesn't have really much impact on the broad array of animals that are housed, what are other actions? Well, some people get frustrated and they turn to ballot boxes and they turn to protest. A good example of this would be out in California in 2008. Voters there went to the polls and passed a law that was later amended by some state legislation that essentially banned the sale of eggs produced from chickens in the most confined housing conditions. Now, this might have produced some positive change in animal welfare, but it also had a significant impact on price. Our research suggested it increased the prices of eggs in California from anywhere from 10 to 20% as a result of these laws. In fact, here's a picture one of my former students who now lives out in California sent me that many of the grocery stores put on their shelves reminding consumers, hey, this is why egg prices are increasing. Not only does this have an impact on consumers, and particularly worrying on lower income consumers, it has an impact on farmers. In many ways, it acts as something like an unfunded mandate. Farmers are required to adopt a more costly production system, while consumers have shown through their own behavior in the marketplace they're unwilling to provide sufficient compensation. Of course, there are other policies people have proposed. For example, here's People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA, that proposes a meat tax. Of course, this could lower or reduce the number of farm animals that exist, but there's very little reason to suggest or believe that it would improve the quality of lives of the farm animals that remain. So where are we? What we've seen is that labels in marketplaces, that the existing policy options that are on the table don't really seem to have much impact on animal welfare at prices that we're willing to pay. And yet many consumers say we still want higher levels of animal welfare. So what's to be done? Well, how do you normally go about getting things that you want? Let's say you wanted a new pair of shoes. Would you protest for free shoes? Would you go down to the courthouse and ask your legislature for a free shoe law? No, chances are you would probably get online or go down to the mall and try to find someone who's willing to sell you a pair of shoes at a price you're willing to pay. So I think this thought experiment gives us a little bit of an insight as to a potential solution. What we have is something that people say they want, higher animal welfare, and yet there's not a clear and tangible way for people to get it. So let me propose a potentially radical solution to you, and I realize this is going to sound a bit strange, so just stick with me for a little bit. I think the key here is to recognize that a farm produces multiple outputs. Farms produce the things we all know about, pork chops, eggs, dairy. They take those products and they turn around and eventually sell them to consumers. Some of those consumers may care about animal welfare, others don't. But the key here is to realize that farms also produce another output, animal welfare. In that animal welfare, some meat and egg consumers might care about that animal welfare. But there's also another group of people who might passionately care about that animal welfare, but don't participate in these meat and egg markets. So the key here is to think about how we could decouple the market for eggs and meat from a market from animal welfare. And the basic idea here is to give farmers property rights over something I'm going to call animal welfare credits. And once in possession of these animal welfare credits, they can turn around and then try to sell them on some kind of organized exchange. Now, I suspect you must be thinking to yourself, Jayson, what the heck is an animal welfare credit? It's really just a measure of farm animal welfare. You can imagine a third-party auditor going on a farm and looking at the number of farm animals that are there, measuring the air quality, mortality, level of illness and stress that the animals are experiencing, looking at things like feather and hoof condition, the level of lighting, whether the animals in that environment are able to exhibit some natural behaviors. Take all those things into consideration and create a score. And that score can then be turned around and converted into a number of animal welfare credits that are then given to the producer who owns them, and then can turn around and think about selling them. Now, you might think, let me back up for just a second and say, this might sound a little strange, right? That we could quantify animal welfare, but I want you to realize that actually there are a lot of people that already quantify animal welfare. If you're a farmer and you want to sell to McDonald's, for example, You have to meet a whole set of guidelines and checklists to be able to sell to McDonald's. So in this case, all that McDonald's has done is made animal welfare a yes or no. Either it's high enough to sell to McDonald's or it's not. And all I'm proposing here is just to take that yes-no and turn it into a more continuous measure and assign those property rights over this new thing called animal welfare credits. So who might buy these animal welfare credits? Well, people donate billions of dollars every year to charities. Some of those charities are animal advocacy organizations. One of the largest is the Humane Society of the United States. They collect about $100 million in donations every year. These dollars go to pay their staff and lawyers. They go to lobby for animal welfare campaigns. They go to run advertisements. And those activities have indirect and very uncertain impacts on animal welfare. Now, if they instead took some of those donations and bought animal welfare credits, it would have a more direct and more tangible impact on animal welfare. But it's not just charities. Even companies like McDonald's or Walmart might want to go out and buy animal welfare credits to offset their use of animal products. And then, of course, you and I, as a food consumer, might go out and try to do the same. So, again, if this sounds a little bit strange, one of the things I want you to realize is that there are several activities that we might participate in that are very much like this. For example, many cities, companies, and municipalities participate voluntarily in exchanges to offset their carbon impacts. In fact, many airlines, when you go out to buy an airline ticket, allow you to offset the carbon impacts of your flight when you do that. And in fact, since 1990, with the passage of the Clean Air Act, there are now large-scale pollution trading markets. And the way these work is very much along the same lines that I've talked about animal welfare. The key is to realize that, say, a coal plant, it produces two outputs, electricity, but it also produces something else, pollution. And the way these pollution trading markets work is that there's a cap. And if a firm pollutes more than it's allowed above the cap, it has to go out and buy allowances from other companies that are under the cap. You can certainly imagine an animal welfare market working much the same way, but instead of a cap, there would be a floor. And if a farm doesn't produce enough animal welfare, it has to go out and buy credits from firms that are above the floor. But what I'm imagining here is a purely voluntary type of system. So you might imagine, why would farmers want to participate in this system? Well, that's fairly easy because they can make money doing it. And in fact, the higher the prices of animal welfare credits, the greater the incentive for a farmer to participate, and the greater the incentive for a farmer to figure out cost-effective ways of improving farm animal welfare. Now, I realize many of you are not going to like the idea of using markets to determine the level of farm animal welfare. But I think the key to realize is that markets are already determining the level of animal welfare. These are the markets for eggs, the markets for milk, the markets for bacon. So the question really isn't whether we want to use markets to improve animal welfare, but rather what kind of markets we want to use. So if you think the current markets for meat and dairy and eggs have not incentivized producers to adopt high animal welfare standards, the answer isn't to turn your back on markets, but rather to think creatively about how we might harness the power of markets to improve the lives of farm animals. So, who's willing to buy some animal welfare credits? Thanks.